One evening, I found myself in a small art gallery, drawn in by a colorful painting that reminded me of the way the sky looked during a storm. The gallery owner, a woman in her mid-40s with short silver hair, approached me with a warm smile. "First time here?" she asked. I nodded, still staring at the painting. "Yeah, I've never really paid attention to art before. But this feels like something I need to understand." She chuckled softly. "Art has a way of doing that. Sometimes it's not about understanding. It's about feeling. Let it speak to you." I smiled, unsure of how to respond. But her words lingered with me as I left the gallery that night. I didn't have to understand everything. I just had to feel it, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something real. A small spark of curiosity, of possibility. The next day, I signed up for an art class. It wasn't about becoming an artist. It was about giving myself permission to try something new, to step outside the boundaries I had spent my whole life inside. It felt like a small act of rebellion against everything I had known. The first class was awkward. I could barely hold a paintbrush, let alone create something beautiful. But the instructor was patient, guiding me through the process without judgment. The other students, most of them older than me, were kind, their laughter light and easy. By the end of the class, I had made a mess of my canvas. But it was my mess, and for the first time, I didn't mind. It was a symbol of something I was starting to understand. I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to be me. I returned to the apartment that night with a new sense of purpose. I might not have everything figured out, but I was no longer standing still. For the first time in my life, I was moving forward. And that was enough. Tomorrow, I would try again. Tomorrow, I would take another step, no matter how small. Because I wasn't running away anymore. I was living. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing one, I could feel the pieces of myself slowly falling back into place, like a puzzle that had been scattered and now, finally, was beginning to take shape again. But that didn't mean it was easy. No, not at all. Every day brought its own set of challenges, its own questions that I wasn't always prepared to answer. It had become a routine. I woke up early, ran through my workout to clear my head, then made myself a cup of coffee. I spent my days in the bookstore, helping the owner with odd jobs, shelving books, and engaging in the occasional conversation with customers. It was peaceful. There was a certain comfort in the quiet of the space, in the smell of the pages, and the soft hum of the city outside. But there were moments, fleeting but intense, when I could feel the weight of everything I had left behind. Some nights, I would sit by the window of my apartment, staring out at the city, watching the lights twinkle as the world moved on without me. The streets were filled with people, going about their business, living their lives, and for a second, I wondered if they ever felt the same emptiness I did. But then, there were other nights when the silence didn't feel so heavy, and I would feel a wave of calm wash over me. It was in these moments that I allowed myself to breathe, to actually live, to feel like I was finally in the right place. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was slowly becoming. Becoming who exactly? That was the question I had yet to answer. One evening, I decided to go for a walk. It was one of those crisp fall nights, the kind where the air feels sharp but refreshing. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders and stepped out into the dark. I wandered aimlessly through the quiet streets, not really knowing where I was headed, but trusting that the city would lead me somewhere. I passed the art gallery again. The lights inside were dim, and I was drawn to the warmth, to the small feeling of home it gave me. I hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door. The same silver-haired woman was behind the counter, a smile creeping up on her face as she saw me. "Back again, I see," she said. I smiled, unsure of how to respond. "Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that painting. The one with the stormy sky." She nodded as though she had expected this. "You know, the artist who painted that piece has a saying, 'Storms are the only way we can see the stars.'" I blinked, surprised by the simplicity yet depth of the words. "I like that," I said softly. She studied me for a moment, her gaze kind but discerning. Sometimes the storms in our lives are what allow us to see the things that were always there, waiting for us. I felt a strange sense of connection in her words, as though she was speaking directly to the storm inside me, the one I had tried to run from, the one I thought I had left behind. I think I'm starting to understand that, I admitted. She smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. Good. Sometimes it takes time, but the storm will pass, and when it does, you'll find that the sky is more beautiful than you ever imagined. I nodded, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded me for weeks. Maybe I wasn't as lost as I had thought. Maybe, just maybe, I was beginning to find my way. And it wasn't about having all the answers right now. It was about embracing the uncertainty, about living through the storm and trusting that the stars would eventually come into view. I left the gallery that night with a lightness in my step, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was on the right path. The storm inside me hadn't passed yet, but I was learning to dance in the rain, and that, in itself, was a victory. The days following that conversation at the gallery felt different. Lighter, somehow, but still charged with the weight of everything I had yet to confront. I had learned to accept the storm inside me, but I had yet to face the truths that still clung to me, like shadows in the corners of my mind. At work, I was moving through the motions. The bookstore had become a sanctuary, a place where I could momentarily forget about the rest of the world. Each day, I buried myself deeper into its comfortable routine, arranging shelves, cataloging new arrivals, and engaging in light conversations with regular customers. But every so often, I would catch myself zoning out, thinking of all the things I hadn't dealt with yet. I still hadn't spoken to Sam. The thought of him would creep into my mind, and the guilt would coil in my stomach like a snake, twisting and tightening. I wasn't ready to face him, not yet. The idea of sitting down with him, of trying to explain everything, felt suffocating. There were too many emotions swirling, too many things left unsaid. I had pushed him away. I had left, but that didn't change the fact that he was part of my story. A part of me still wanted to believe that I could fix things between us, but deep down, I knew the damage had already been done. One rainy afternoon, as I was shelving a new batch of books, the bell above the door jingled, signaling someone had entered. I turned to find a familiar face standing in the doorway. It was Sam. I froze, caught between the instinct to run and the desire to face him. He stood there for a moment, looking hesitant, his eyes scanning the room as though unsure whether to approach. But then, as though pulled by some invisible force, he took a step forward. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice tentative, almost as if he were testing the waters. "Can we talk?" I swallowed, feeling the lump in my throat grow. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the walls I had carefully built around myself beginning to crumble. This was it, the moment I had been dreading. "Sure," I replied, though my voice sounded foreign to me. "I guess we can." He nodded and walked over to the counter where I had been working, taking a seat across from me. The silence between us stretched for a long, uncomfortable moment, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the uncertainty in his eyes. He was just as unsure as I was. Finally, he spoke, his words hesitant but heavy with meaning. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened between us, and I know I messed up. I know I hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I still hear about you. I don't know if that means anything anymore, but I thought you should know." His confession hit me like a wave, sweeping over me in a rush of emotions I hadn't expected to feel. Part of me wanted to reach out, to forgive him, but another part of me recoiled in pain. He had hurt me in ways that were hard to articulate, and it felt like too much to forgive too soon. "I don't know what you want from me, Sam," I said, my voice trembling despite my attempt to stay calm. "You can't just show up here and expect everything to be okay. You can't just fix things with a few words." He nodded, guilt written all over his face. "I know. I don't expect that. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I was an idiot. I should have been better for you. For us." I looked away, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. "You weren't the only one who messed up, Sam," I said quietly. "I pushed you away too, but I don't think either of us knew how to fix it once it started falling apart." There was a long silence before he spoke again. "Do you think we could try? Not to fix it, but to find some sort of peace with everything. Because I can't move on without knowing that you're okay." His words were like a lifeline, pulling me out of the darkness for a brief moment. I had never imagined Sam would care so much about me still, not after everything. But his sincerity in that moment made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal, even if it wasn't together. I don't know, I whispered. I don't know if we can go back to how things were. But I think I need time. To figure things out. To figure myself out. He nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. I can wait. I'm not going anywhere. I didn't know if his promise would mean anything in the long run, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything more. Instead, we sat there, two people caught in the quiet aftermath of what we had once been. When he left, the storm inside me felt a little less overwhelming, though it was still very much present. Maybe there wasn't an easy answer. Maybe there wasn't even a right one. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could make peace with my past and move forward. It was just the beginning. But that, I realized, was enough. The following days felt like a blur, days that blurred together, filled with questions I wasn't sure how to answer. The conversation with Sam had left me with a heavy heart, but it also left me with something I hadn't expected. A spark of clarity. A small but important realization began to settle inside me, like a seed that had been planted, waiting to grow. I wasn't sure where I was headed, but I knew that facing my past, facing Sam, was only one step of many. The pieces of the puzzle that had been scattered around me for so long, the hurt, the confusion, the regrets, none of it would fall into place unless I confronted it all. And that meant facing the other parts of my life that I had avoided, the pieces I had pushed away in favor of distraction. Work had become my refuge, a place where I could lose myself in the mundane tasks that required no emotional investment. But even there, I found myself thinking about Sam, about everything we had been and everything we had lost. I would catch myself zoning out while shelving books, my mind drifting back to the old arguments, the silences that had grown between us until they were insurmountable. But there was one thing I hadn't allowed myself to think about, one thing I had been too afraid to confront. It had been weeks since the miscarriage. I still hadn't said the word out loud, not to anyone, not even to myself. It felt like an impossible truth, one that would make everything feel even more fragile. But it was there, lurking beneath the surface, coloring everything I saw and felt. I had avoided the topic with my friends, avoiding the awkward silence that would come after any mention of it. They didn't know how to talk about it either, and I didn't have the strength to help them find the words. I could see the pity in their eyes, the way they would tiptoe around me, trying to be gentle, trying to be understanding. But it felt like a kindness that only made the wound deeper. Then, one evening after closing the bookstore, I sat at the small table in my apartment, staring at my phone. I had texted Sam a few days ago, and I hadn't received a response. My thumb hovered over the screen, uncertain if I should send something more, if I should just open the floodgates. But instead of texting him, I opened a new message, one I hadn't dared write in weeks. It was to my mom. I hadn't spoken to her since everything had started to fall apart, since Sam and I had broken up, since everything had spiraled into something I didn't recognize. There had been too much distance between us, too much unsaid. But as I stared at the blank screen, I realized that maybe now was the time to bridge that gap. To tell her about the loss, about the pain that had quietly consumed me in the weeks since the miscarriage. I typed and deleted a dozen messages before finally pressing send. I lost the baby, Mom. I didn't know how to tell you. I don't know how to say this, but I think I need you. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then place the phone down, as though by doing so I could stop the flood of emotions that had already begun to rise. The minutes ticked by. And then, a reply. I'm so sorry, honey. I'm here. I love you. It was simple, but it was enough. In that moment, I felt a little less alone. I didn't know what to expect from Sam or from anyone else, but I realized that reaching out was something I had to do for myself. It didn't matter if he replied or if my friends understood. What mattered was that I acknowledged my own grief, my own pain, and began to let it out. It didn't make it go away, but it gave me the space to breathe. The following week, I called my mom. It was a short conversation, filled with more silences than words, but I felt lighter after it ended. The next day, Sam finally reached out, his message simple but heartfelt. I'm here, whenever you're ready. I didn't know if that would be enough. I didn't know if we could ever find our way back to what we once had. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to see where this would lead. I wasn't ready to heal, but I was ready to start. One step at a time.